to Eva-Lisa because she hasn't sat up the front before. Chris wouldn't sit up the front, so she had to. Sorry, Martin.
Dan, talking to the GM, that item 13, is that right, being held over for next month to enable the residents
item itself won't be rolled over. The proposed outcome will be, Martin, and the GM, Chris, will speak to that when we get there about the reason for that. Right. But it's still on the agenda.
No, that's right. In which case, when you come to declarations of interest, I'll make a brief statement, if I may.
Okay, sure. I'll come to you first on that, Martin. Thanks. So with that, those discussions in mind, and the note that we're going to get a new attachment 4 for it's supposed to be on page, in the GM's report. I'll move that the agenda be confirmed, seconded by Jeff. Those in favour, against, carried. Thank you. Any declarations of interest other than the one Martin signalled for future? I'll come to you at the start of that item. We'll record it now.
Just note that over 20 years ago I had a financial interest in that particular property at number 2 Anglesey Street. I live in the neighbourhood about a couple of hundred metres away, but I'm not directly affected by the development there in terms of my own property and amenities, so I will be still participating, obviously, as a councillor. So it's a
perceptual one, and you wish you did still own the property.
Well, I won't comment on that.
Okay. Thanks for that. We'll record that. There's no public forum unless there is someone come that's expecting to be in it. We have not been notified of anyone. If not, we'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting on page 6. Are there any items people wish to raise for clarification or correction of them? If not, I'll move that they be received.
Sorry,
Sorry, Gary, I didn't see that.
That's no problem. On page 9, we advise that. Page 9, under the future-proof minute, item C, request that in future-proof not make submissions to outside bodies. Blah blah blah. How are we going? Have we advised? Who's doing that? Someone telling future-proof that they need to ask us before they speak on our...
My understanding is that Blair was taking that up.
Okay.
Jen's nodding behind that. Okay. That's the case. He's the staff member, Special Projects GM, that handles that.
Okay, yep. Thank you. So he'll just advise that verbally, will he?
Yeah, but we'll check that with him that he has done that, but that was the plan. Yep.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know whether this is correct, I've got Paula appearing on the speaking list here, but
just coming in now.
Oh, Paula, you got a question about the minutes? No? All right. All right. If there's no other questions on the minutes starting of the 29th of May, I'll move they be received as a true and correct record. Seconded by James. Thank you. Those in favour or against, that's carried. We're going swimmingly, but that'll probably change soon. Onto the Chair's report on page 16, starting there. Councillors, we're going to the Amberfield thing, the first paragraph, just say a couple of things about these points, is going to come up for discussion next. So I've simply put it on there so that councillors can have a say should they wish to, it's not a decision-making subject. It's a matter where we can have give feedback to council staff who will be preparing the submission that council puts in. You'll see that I've proposed that we change the task force chairs around for a couple of them, and I have discussed that with both the other people concerned, and they ecstatic? No, that's probably not the right word. Willing to go along with it. So that's one of the recommendations. Recommendation E. Wastemen's Conference. Sorry, I'll just quickly run through the notes and go back. I know that Siggy has registered for it. Oh, intends. Oh, sorry. So I've got that slightly ahead of myself. Okay. Interested. And if anyone else is, can they please go through democracy as soon as possible? Who will, Laura perhaps, is that right? Yeah, he'll sort it out. The road safety, we've got Harry Wilson, some of you will know the NZTA's National Road Safety Manager. I'm not sure whether that's absolutely the correct title because they keep changing things down there, but he's the top boss in NZTA in charge of road safety who's coming to speak here today. What's his title, Barry?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. His title is Group Manager Safety and Environment, and I stress the word environment as well because, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll come to him and Barry later, so thanks for that. That'll be quite soon. Passenger rail to Auckland, there's going to be an update in the GM's report, which Chris will give, and then on to the recommendations. So questions, who have I got? I've got Rob, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I was just seeking some clarification around the professional development budget for each councillor and whether or not it was sufficient. I seem to note that quite regularly we're having this approval by resolution of certain conferences. And my first question around that is how is the by resolution actually reported?
I mean, it's a good point. We had earlier, I believe it was a team sort of discussion that said anyone going on behalf of council to I'm loosely paraphrasing it, on behalf of council to a conference or something of that nature should be reporting back to council on, with a little summary of their conference. If that's by resolution, I don't know whether the same rigour applies to by choice, i.e. the training budget. But so I guess what I'm suggesting here is that we send the equivalent of an official delegate who will report back. But it's never been in response to the training budget being too small. It's been in response to that being an area of interest for the whole of council.
For the actual reporting back. My reporting query, though, was around how it's actually reported back. Is it reported back against the councillor's own budget as expenditure? And if there was
you mean the financial reporting?
If it was Lagoima, there was a Lagoima request, would that be added into the councillor's personal spend on professional development?
So I understand your question, Councillor Pascoe. So the conference by resolution isn't individually financially recorded against the 6,000 PD that you get per year. It's a separate budget allocation. If we did get a Lagoima, we would specify that you did attend a conference by resolution, and that would be specified in any Lagoima request that we got. So it's completely outside of the 6,000 PD and it's reported as such. So we record that internally in a spreadsheet that we have and keep tabs on it pretty closely.
So it's not lost. It's not lost in the system if it appears that way. Yeah. I guess my question is still there is, that we do have an annual budget and whether or not we can fit, if that budget is insufficient, whether we should be by resolution increasing the budget rather than doing individual conferences by resolution, given that councillors will attend the conferences that interest their particular areas of interest and expertise.
Look, that's a fair point, and we maybe could discuss that future. I guess in the current financial year, this is my summation of the situation. We've decided we'd do it like this, but going forward, we can have that discussion. I've only suggested that we support, if you like, involvement at 2 conferences to date. One's the Traffins one and the other one's this one. And I know that we send official delegates to LG&Z, and some of them, I believe, are a conference by resolution, and some of that is by choice too, from what I understand. That's not in my area. So it's used fairly sparingly.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We might record that as a note, though, that can be raised before next year gets underway.
Yeah, that would be useful, and then it saves, it saves having to do it as a separate job task, I guess. And it also means that councillors are reasonably happy that they've got a realistic budget that allows them to get the PD that they think is appropriate for them.
Just to reiterate the point that Councillor McPherson made around the purpose of the conference by resolution is for delegates to attend. So instead of an elected member having to use their PD budget for something that they've been delegated to attend to represent council, it's sort of more of a fairer way to do it rather than specify that they have to use their PD to attend that budget.
But we're not going as delegates to this conference.
I am suggesting that we send a delegate. Perhaps the wording was a bit loose there, Rob.
Okay.
But that was a suggestion that we send a delegate, fund that out of the main council budget rather than any training budget. But if another one wants to go, we share that between them. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got Gary, thanks.
So does that mean the delegate, there's a requirement that the delegate would report back, whereas another person going down there or person not going as a delegate but using their PD may not necessarily be required to give some form of formal feedback? We expect them to be brainier and smarter about things, but that may or may not happen. but if you're a delegate and being funded by the council other than your individual personal development budget, we as a council expect some report back.
Yeah.
So that's sort of I guess it's an informal agreement that you as a delegate would bring back any knowledge or any important points that you took from the conference or training that you attended. But there's nothing official that we put in place or require elected members to do that. It's more sort of an informal expectation, I guess, that you would do.
And I think it's something that other councillors could ask about. And I know that Paula, as a matter of course, sends an email around if she's been to something on behalf of council as a delegate, just with a little summary of what she regards as the relevant points. Which is proper. And we did talk about that sort of way of handling it as the informal expectation. But, I mean, next time we have a team meeting, let's just check that everyone's on the same page, I guess, on that. Paula, sorry.
Just to add one thing to that, I guess the point is that there are some conferences that are of such importance to the work that we do that we really would like someone to attend on our behalf and not wait for someone to find it a personal interest to go. But I mean, obviously, with our interest in waste, it's really important, given that Ziggy's going to have a key role in waste, that someone attends the Wastemen's Conference, someone attends the Transport Conference and such, and other ones are more discretional, yeah?
Yeah, and I think, and you reminded us in your email about the Wastemen's one, which was good. And Becca is also taking responsibility for getting a full list of upcoming conferences together from time to time and putting that on OneDrive if anyone wants to flick to a place where they're all listed, and we'll update it every time she gets some time, which is not that often. Okay, no other questions on that? I'll just move to the recommendations, noting that the change in task force chairs is a recommendation to council. We don't have the authority to make that final decision here because of a council resolution that was made some short time ago. So we can only recommend to council. So that item will also appear on the council list of jobs, if you like it. I don't know whether this Thursday or... Yep. Yeah, this Thursday.
Just a question.
Sure.
Got no issue with that. Got no issue with who's being suggested either. What was the rationale for that at this time?
Workload, sharing the responsibilities.
Okay.
Yeah, workload on my part and sharing the responsibilities on amongst other councillors, particularly new councillors.
Oh, and I presume it was discussed with Mark and Ziggy.
Yeah, that's what you were out of the room, sorry. I started off by saying that. I wouldn't have put it up without talking with them first.
Oh, no. Just wondered what the process was, how that had come up. That's good, thanks.
It was me chatting with them. Yeah. Okay, so I'll move that, seconded by James. Thank you, James. Always good for a seconding. Any discussion on that? Oh, Mark, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to help Paula there and say, look, one of the principles of the rubbish and recycling thing was reuse and recycling, so we figured we'd do that right from the top and lead by example and do that with the leadership of the task force. I am. I loved it to bits. But I just want to say while I've got the floor, thank you, Dave, for the confidence. And I also want to thank the staff of the rubbish and recycling crew who've made that ride a really interesting and easy one. And I'm really excited about the Access Hamilton, and we'll give it guts. And I wish Siggy all the very best for that. And I think there's no one better to carry that legacy on.
Yep. Okay. Nothing else, thanks. We've got a mover and seconder. I'll put the recommendation on page 16. Those in favour, against? Just by show of hands, sorry. Okay. Yep, thanks. That's carried unanimously. All right. We're going to move to the Amberfield discussion. Is that okay to start that a bit early, Jen? Yeah. Yep. So that's, councillors, just the introductory page on sheet on page 19. And I just want to stress here that the purpose of this is not to decide by any resolution what we're going to say in the council staff submission to the independent commissioner-run hearing. It's simply to give feedback to staff so they're aware of what we regard as the issues. Of what we regard as the issues ahead of them writing their RMA submission. In the past, councillors, elected members, have not always had input to some situations and have felt left out, and this is a new process, and Jen and I have talked quite a bit about this, and it's how we can do it without upsetting the RMA cart, as it were, is the intention of running this. So are there any questions about what we're doing here first? Yeah, thanks, Gary.
And it's just a very simple one. The attachment, I assume that is unchanged from the presentation we got from the people earlier on.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So there's no new information.
Those who were at the workshop have all seen this.
Yep.
If you weren't, this is the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the background. So I guess we prefer not to go into too much of that detail. It's what, having heard that or having read this, what do you think the issues are that you'd like to see staff cover? Have you got any questions of clarification, that sort of thing? I've got Paula first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I went to the open day as well, and that was very good. I guess the two questions I have relate to insurances about. I'm going to bat for the bats, but I have to say that I have to know what's. They've got a little bit in this report about how the bat roosts, fly paths are going to be protected. Is there another step in the process where that will be assurances from bat expertise will be given around that? I don't know enough about bats, but you know.
So ecology is definitely a part of the consideration set. So that, I guess that kind of speaks to what this conversation is all about today. So should I just...
Yep.
Councillor McPherson has stolen somewhat of my thunder, but today really is about understanding exactly that sort of thing, Councillor Southgate, in terms of understanding where your priorities are and things that you want to make sure that we are focusing on or thinking about through this process. So the notification for the consent went out at the end of last week, so we are in a process. And we have an enormous amount of information from the applicant and work that we're doing in council as well about what they are proposing. Their exciting proposal for about 1,000 houses in that space. So it is an open process. We don't have all of the information yet. We are expecting submissions from interested parties. There may be a hearing. And what today is about is, as I said, understanding what your priorities are, things you want to make sure that we've got on our agenda so that we don't miss anything out that is important to you. So what I thought we would do today is that Lachlan will just give you a brief overview of how you can have that input and who you need to talk to. Karen Saunders, who many of you will know is the program manager for the whole of the Peacock project, and obviously this is the first part of that project that we're talking to you about, and then we're just here to listen.
Okay, so I'll just hold my questions.
Yeah, that's
till
right.
that.
I'll
Is
come
that
back
right?
to you first, Paula.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank
Lachlan.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Good morning, councillors. Look, I just want to start by saying that I fully endorse the process that has been adopted here in this meeting. There has historically been questions around what is the appropriate mechanism for elected members to have input into resource consent processes, and at times that has created a tension because you'll be aware there is, in the Local Government Act, there is a section which deals with governance principles, and section 39 of the Act talks about the obligation that you have to keep the regulatory functions of council separate from the non-regulatory functions. And so at times maintaining that separation can present some challenges. And of course a resource consent process is a regulatory function. So how do you have input when you have this obligation in terms of governance to stay separate? And the answer in my view is exactly what you're doing today, and the process that you're adopting today. So in terms of that regulatory function, staff will be required to present a report which feeds into the hearing process, and that's commonly known as the Section 42A report. You'll hear Section 42A bandied around a lot in RMA terms, and that's the staff report that goes into the hearing. And that staff report draws together a whole lot of information, including information from within council. So it might reach out, for example, to the infrastructure team, it might reach out to the parks team, for example, and take on board feedback from those teams and bring it in terms of its Section 42A report. And this process is the ideal mechanism for you to feed into that 42A report. So you've got, as a G&I committee, you've got the ear of your infrastructure team. So this is the opportunity for you to say to your infrastructure team, for example, here are the things that really matter to us. Make sure that these are the things that get fed into the 42A report for consideration. So for me, this, as I say, this structure that you've adopted is bang on, and I fully endorse it. And just really to come back to Jen's point, we're all ears now in terms of what you would want to see fed into the 42A report.
Thanks very much, Lachlan. Jen?
Just in addition to that, there is a briefing on the 13th of September next week that Karen will lead, which will be talking about the private developer agreement, but also we'll be able to have a few more technical conversations. If there's stuff that comes out of today where we need to give you some answers or have a broader conversation about it, then we can do that on the 13th. Today really is just about us writing down what those items are. We did get a few of those out of the questions that you were asking at the briefing when the applicant came in the other week, in terms of particularly around the sports fields and traffic, but really happy for you guys to put all of those things on the table again.
Right, come back to you, Paula.
Okay, so given that there may or may not be a hearing, I just want to understand where we get the information about Project Echo, the BATS. Just, I think I've said enough on that, but they've put some information in here, but of course you've got to test everything, that all the assumptions, haven't you? The other part that I'm interested in is the Esplanade Reserve aspects of it. I think I gave feedback at the time. There are some parts that are reasonably wide and form a really nice open esplanade along the river, and there are 2 or 3 pinch points that are really narrow, which I'm less happy with. I just wonder whether we can give some consideration to you know, a width along the whole esplanade, because that's the part that the general public will have access to going forward along the river. And I think it's really important that we do maintain a lovely opportunity there for the public across the length of the development, and there are 1 or 2 points where it's quite narrow there. That's it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Siggy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure how much influence or whatever we have on this, but I was slightly nervous when they talked about the different housing, and it all looks lovely, and it's not an SHA, so they don't have to do affordable housing. But when, and I don't know whether anybody else picked that up, but when they said that they're building these bigger houses first in conjunction with a few smaller ones, but the smaller ones will sell for the same amount as the big ones, I got a bit nervous. So I don't know what we can do there, and I just think they're already predicting that the prices of these houses and apartments or duplexes, and that already with any developer makes me nervous, because they're already thinking, yeah, the big dollars. So I don't, do we have any influence on that or not? Well, it's market driven, of course, as well, and I understand that. But is there anything we can say or do?
So the pricing obviously is market driven.
Yeah.
But our role is in making sure that the typologies that they've got and the way that they've configured the different houses meet with the rules that council has in place for the area.
Okay, we can't. Okay, all good. Thank you.
What about the construction order? Do we have a say on that? Because it may come, all big houses first, or a mixture first, or.
We're not in an SHA, obviously, so we're in an ordinary development opportunity for land development. So unless there's an environmental reason why the sequencing of large houses should occur before smaller houses, if we can link it to an environmental reason, then there could be a condition which could be imposed to that effect. But without an environmental linkage, if the developer wants to produce multi-million-dollar properties in their development, that's a development choice. So put it this way, we'll see. It'll depend on whether or not there is an environmental issue at stake.
Yeah. Thanks, Siggy. Mark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to see a couple of things. Well, one, and underlined under what Paula was saying, regards the narrowness of the esplanade around there, just some addressing of that. Secondly, well, there's three things actually. The rubbish and recycling, the new system that's coming in. I would be very keen to see, because knowing the community is very passionate about the new system that's coming in, I'd like to see some recognition of how that's actually going to be managed, because it is going to be quite a different system to one we've got. Even if it was just in the text, it may be useful to go out with it in there.
And again, that is the kind of thing that can be reflected in consent conditions. So if there is a particular configuration, a subdivision configuration, or something about the streetscape, which is an important element which feeds into and works well with the waste management techniques that you're talking about, they can be conditioned out in the resource consent or in the subdivision consent.
Okay, and so what stage do we... This is when we bring it up, though, isn't it?
Well, this is the opportunity to flag it as an issue. That's important to you, and I think we're making notes.
Thank you.
And as I say, there is a mechanism in the consenting process to take account of that. And impose conditions of consent which resolve the issue for you.
Cool. So look, just while we're on that, then I'd also like to see perhaps a stronger nod towards the alternative transport, cycleways and flow in there. I appreciate that some of the streets are pretty narrow, and we're going to be talking about emergency services and a lot more, hopefully, cycle transport connecting with the city. So perhaps I'd like to see a nod. That's quite important to me. Thank you.
Yeah. I see Karen writing lots of notes as people are talking. Deputy Mayor Martin, thanks.
Thank you. To a degree, it picks up Paula's point around the esplanade. I'm obviously particularly focused on our so-called the public space, and it seems to me that in terms of the drawings, whether it's an off drawing, I know we're going to do more, but the alternative to the river trail and a clear delineation and a clear statement of where the future cycle walkway river trail will go, I think that should be in the drawings, because I'm aware on the other side in the Riverlea area there's some conservation issues long term for that particular cycle trail, and it seems to me logically on the west side through to the Narrows Bridge, this has got to be long term, the better, probably a better long term route for a riverside trail. And it seems to me that in the plans, so we avoid any doubt whatsoever. I think this is, because you've got Esplanade there anyway, we clearly put that in, and you know, it'll be, presumably from a council point of view, a future 3-year, 10-year plan item. But I think that should be in as well. And the other thing...
Sorry, Martin, if I could just interrupt
sure.
you there. Explanation, the trigger is probably Southern Links, because that's a new bridge back across the river next door to the Narrows Bridge, which would hardly holds 2 cars, let alone cycles as well at the moment. So it might be that when the Peacock Bridge and the Southern Links Bridge are in, that's when you have to be able to construct the Tiawa Walkway alternative route.
What I'm keen to ensure is we have other chunks of our river that there's, you know, public land, but they're basically used as a private domain by the adjoining property owner. And years ago we had the Aotearoa Avenue where Ted Armstrong cut fences, and there's, you know, a lot of hoo-ha. It just seems to me we need to clearly, in every document we can find, indicate our intention so there's no ambiguity, there's a clear long-term plan, people know exactly where they stand. And I think, picking up Paula's point, obviously I would want assurances that the public esplanade in terms of gradient is going to be sufficient, you know, to accommodate the walkway, cycleway, obviously, and also in terms of, you know, a future link across to the Hamilton Gardens, which I think will be under or beside the road bridge. But if that's what I'm just trying to get in a pickup point about Southern Links. So, as I said, so it's clear that it may be 5 years, 6 years away, but everyone knows it's coming.
Lachlan, how far ahead can you have a condition imposed, say, when so-and-so happens, then something has to be enabled?
Well, there's no problem with drafting a condition of consent, which is basically a condition precedent, which is what you're talking about. So you might say that when something happens, this needs to happen. So that kind of consent is appropriate, and it's also appropriate to have a condition that says you can't do something until something happens. So both of those kinds of condition precedents are lawful. The only issue that you've got as you work your way out into the future is a certainty question. And where the conditions become less and less certain, and where they start to involve the actions of third parties who the consent holder is not in control of, then the condition may fail for certainty, and the Environment Court would say you need to find another way. So I don't have a hard and fast answer for you. I'd need to look at the circumstances, but the critical issue is you can do that, but it needs to still be certain.
In this case, for instance, the 2 bridges that we were talking about, they're both designated.
Yes.
Not built, not even owned the land, 100% of things like that yet, but they have had a formal process attached to them.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say at a reasonably high level is that I think any condition precedents that relate to the bridge and the introduction of the Peacock Bridge, I think, as a starting point, I would say is sufficiently certain because of where we're at with that Southern Links project and the HIF funding and so on and so forth. So intuitively, I'm okay with that as a condition precedent.
Thanks. Martin, did you have another issue, or was that?
No, I mean, well, but obviously, just so we're clear that in our plans, we can put that in, I assume. You know, I think this is more related to the use of our esplanade, which is, you know, in the public realm. But from our staff team, obviously, I want categorical assurance that the cycleway can be accommodated. It's realistic. Now, I think we're workshopping that issue, but it seems to me, in terms of our chat with Amberfield, in all the sort of drawings that people will see, it's important to clearly indicate where that will go.
Yep. Thanks. Jeff, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, look, I've just got a couple of points regarding traffic management, infrastructure, planning for infrastructure, and speed management. A couple of these have been touched on already, but I guess I just want for us to be reassured that this new development is obviously going to cause extra traffic, and I just want us as a council to be to be comfortable that the measures created are going to accommodate that extra traffic, you know, such as intersection upgrades in your Melville and your Glenview area. I know there's Peacock Road, there's talk about that, and Normandy, Lawn Street, Bader Street. So I just want to be, for us as a council, staff and councillors, to be comfortable that that's going to be accommodated for. In terms of infrastructure, provision of you know, bus lanes, cycle and walkways, again, I just want us to be comfortable that these are going to be provided, these are going to be a priority in regard and treated as a priority by the developers.
Both of those things will be are a key part of the assessment.
Okay, great. And the last one is in regard to speed management. I noted in the briefing that initially their thoughts were along the lines of 50 k's in that sort of neighbourhood area, whereas this council is I believe, heading for 40 k's preference for new subdivisions in those sorts of neighbourhoods. So I guess, that, again, that's something I'd like us to emphasise, that in the way they plan the subdivision, the way they plan their roads and construct them, that is borne in mind.
Thanks. James, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Do we know at this early stage whether there are going to be certain covenants on this area of Amberfield? Because, you know, we do have to have certain mechanisms in place to prevent areas like this becoming high-density slums. So I'm just wanting to know if there's covenants, or do we know of any covenants that are coming into place?
The density issues will be managed through the subdivision consent, if it's granted. The quality of the build and the nature of the builds on those lots will be managed through a land use consent. So there will be mechanisms in place to control those sort of outcomes. But I'm not sure, and I can go back and check it with staff, as to whether the applicant has offered up any covenants which would sit on the titles, which would control the nature of the development. I don't believe so, but I can check that issue for you and we can come back. I think there's a briefing on the 13th of... None. I've just heard. No, the answer is there are no covenants being offered up on the titles. But as I say, just because there are no covenants attaching to the title doesn't mean there can't be controls imposed in the consent conditions, which will, you know, manage the risks that you're talking about. So there are mechanisms, and they will all be assessed as part of the resource consents.
Okay, just is that usual? Because a lot of the new development areas, especially up north, east, and that, virtually all of them have covenants where you can't have certain fences and brick walls exposed and caravans parked on the front lawn and everything else.
Typically, it's a developer decision, and it's about protecting and maintaining the value of the lots. Because if you can control the nature of the build, you can control the overall amenity of the neighbourhood, and therefore have some level of control over price. But it's usually a developer decision as to whether they want to exert that control or whether they would prefer just to let the market decide what to build. I'm told, as I say, that this developer has chosen not to go with a covenant type approach, and we certainly can't compel them to unless there was an environmental reason. But as I say, I think those environmental concerns can be addressed through conditions of consent, not covenants.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks, James. Sorry, I had a couple of other questions as well. Two of them arise out of Jeff's questions on cycleways and transport generally. One of the issues I noted when we received our workshop presentation a week and a half ago, was that they were talking about the main thoroughfare, which is on one side of the development, having a cycleway and bus lanes and fully developed on one side only, not on the side that they weren't putting the subdivision in. And I felt that they should be required to have the the western side as well up to full standard, because people are obviously not going to be cycling in both directions only on the riverside. They're going to be wanting to or take a bus or whatever. It needs to be, you need to have channel and curb, and maybe not the footpath. Potentially that could be done on either side, but you know, that issue needs to be looked at, so the whole road, not just one side of it, is up to our full spec.
Right.
Was one, and there was a the other one was to do with Bader Street. I was alarmed, to be honest, when I heard the Amberfield people say that they, firstly, well, I knew that the subdivision was going to have houses and people living there before the bridge from over to the gardens and onto the ring road was completed, and it sounds like 2 to 3 years perhaps gap there, and there could be up to several hundred houses anyway in Amberfield constructed by that stage, and they seem to be saying that their preferred traffic access point was through Bader Street. Now Bader Street is not only, and they said we're going to upgrade some of the intersections there. Bader Street is actually a commercial, residential area. Part of it being a cul-de-sac, actually, where the Norrie Crescent part of it, where they go through, and there's a couple of complete right-angle bends with no line of sight because the houses and fences are blocking them and things like that. And I was really concerned that their option being to push traffic out through Bader Street for 2 or 3 years before the bridge is built. There is another option which is out through Dixon Street. It's longer. It seemed to me that upgrading Bader Street so it'd take more traffic is actually not a good outcome in terms of the residents of Bader Street. It might well be in terms of the residents of Amberfield, but we shouldn't create a situation where we're pouring a lot of traffic through an area where a lot of young families live. And also into an intersection area, Bader, Normandy, Lawn Street double intersection, which is pretty darn choked up at peak times. Whereas going out Dixon Road, we're already required to build a new roundabout type or some type of major intersection there with Ohaupo Road. Whether that's, I'd like that sort of quite in a detailed way checked out, because their option didn't seem to be ideal for anyone but themselves. The other issue was, which I've heard discussed, I think Mark raised it in this discussion we had the other day, the timing of the commercial centre there. The way I understood it, they're talking about building some sort of commercial premises or opening that part of it up after the first 3 phases, or all 3 phases of residential, and it seemed to me to be creating a bit of a problem, a whole new suburb with 1,000 or more people living in it, and a couple of thousand maybe, and no shops, and no likely or ability to have a shop there until well down the track, well after they were built. So I'm not sure what influence we can have on that sort of timing, but it seems that, you know, if you're talking about residential amenity, one of the amenity things at least is a basic dairy where you can buy bread and milk, sort of, rather than sending them to Hillcrest or to Glenview, probably or something like that, or into town. They should be able to get some, there should be that amount of amenity from fairly early days.
Well, again, you know, without predetermining it, yes, you're right. That's an amenity issue. It also has a transportation impact because it's potentially increased trip generation. So again, we're now linking the issue back to an environmental effect, which can be considered. So, you know, if the question is what should the right timing or sequencing be of some provision for commercial activity in this node, those issues, those environmental issues, are legitimate concerns and will be part of the overall assessment. So, yep, that's squarely in view.
Right, thanks. Gary.
Thanks, Dave. And I'm sort of, this is kind of a bit of a process question, because I oppose a lot of what Dave just said then. But how does that get recognised?
Your opposition, or?
Yeah, well, I guess because, you know, like we pretend we want affordable housing, and then we put all these covenants and bike lanes and bus lanes on both sides, which do nothing but add cost to the whole process. So it's a complete and utter contradiction of what you're pretending we want affordable houses, but then we create these conditions that are totally uneconomic for the developer. So you're just, and this is not particularly for my issue, but there will be other people who will have different views, I suppose, from other views that have been spoken here. How do we, do I just put my hand up and say, no, I disagree with the bus lanes?
You identify the issues, staff will assess them
so
on
Karen,
an
just
RMA
cross out
sort of
everything
basis.
Dave said, and that would do it pretty much.
Well, I think this is the point, is that what we're now having to do is take the issues on board, and then there will be independent assessments done by technical experts who will make some calls on what's the right way to handle it.
Yeah.
What you can be assured of is that if the sort of concerns that you've identified, Councillor Mallett, you can probably assume that the developer will have a view on a lot of these issues. And of course, in the consent hearing process, the developer will have the opportunity to push back on these issues, and ultimately there will be a decision made. So it's not as if it's all a one way flow. And it may even be that some of the technical assessment work that this council does doesn't necessarily deliver everything that one particular councillor is looking for. That's the technical process. But this is about getting all of the issues on the table and making sure that you're being heard, and making sure that when the staff cover off everything, they don't miss anything.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, that's all we've got. So I think the resolution is just to, I'm not on that page now. What is it? Just to receive the report. Yep. So moved by Mark, seconded by Gary. Those in favour, against, carried. Thanks very much. And just a word, I think future major planning or significant planning issues, we'll look to put them on the agenda too for this sort of discussion as they come up, whether they're high-level things or sort of future subdivision applications that are going to be significant. This was the first Peacocks one, so it was definitely significant. Thanks very much. So we're marginally ahead of time, which is great. It's very unusual as well. So our next item is the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA safety update. Harry Wilson, geez, Harry, you're going to have to give me that title again. Director of Safety and Environment, or?
That's correct, Dave. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Welcome to Hamilton City Council again. Harry's the National Director, so it's all his fault if it's not done right. He's going to tell us about that. I note, I'm not sure whether Harry saw some of the comments about that I put in my chair's report, and we can discuss those issues and any others that people have got when Harry's given his presentation. So Harry, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. And look, it's great to be back. G'day, Leo. Hey, Paula. Many of you. You'll have known me in my previous role as the Regional Director and Freight Director in various parts of NZTA. So a couple of years ago I took on this challenge, safety and environment. So NZTA recognised pre the change in government that the level of trauma on our roads is certainly one of the most significant issues facing New Zealand. Every week 7 people die and 54 are seriously injured. That is not a statistic to be proud of. Behind those numbers, of course, are families, friends, work colleagues. Average New Zealanders, some who's will remember those days, those tragedies for the rest of their lives. So it's a critical thing that we need to do. And of course, the numbers are going the wrong way this year again. 380 deaths last year, fatalities, and the trend is looking to exceed 400 this year. So we have a problem. It's not something that NZTA, the government, can fix on their own. We need your help. We need the help of our communities and the people of New Zealand. So just wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. But the other side of my role is also environment. Just give you a headline number. I talked about 380 people dying on the roads. 262 people in the same period died of early asthmatic responses or rheumatic effects from emissions, vehicle emissions, directly auto vehicle emissions. So the effect of cars, not only the impact and the physical forces involved, but also what they emit, actually has a huge and catastrophic effect on a number of families as well. So the environment is equally important to NZTA. It's not something that we'd actually thought a lot about, actually, other than in terms of our the mitigations we do for consents in the same way you were discussing before around land use. So it's a real opportunity to sit down and have a good think about what we can do. Vehicle emissions are about 19% of greenhouse gas emission, so of the total amount of greenhouse gas. So with a new government focusing on a zero carbon target, reducing greenhouse gas, we're doing a lot of thinking and a lot of work with MOT. Okay, so coming back to safety, so you will be well briefed by Robin and the team around the safe system approach and what that means. I mean, in essence, people often focus on the cause of crashes. What we're trying to do is make sure that when crashes do happen, that people don't die as a result. You know, people will make mistakes. 50% of the road toll in any 1 year is actually an ordinary driver, an ordinary person who makes a simple mistake. Look, I've seen cases, because I read all the CAS reports, all the crash analysis that comes through, and you know, it can be as bizarre as someone dropping a hot pie on their lap. You know, it is that simple, and that action can be the difference between life and death. Simply because our roads are just not forgiving. You know, a white line is not going to stop you when you look down or cross and so forth. So, so under the safe system, we follow a number of pillars. You know, so of ways, and it's a whole system approach that has got to work. So it's not just the roads and roadsides, I suppose is what I'm saying, because people tend to focus on roads and roadside speed. Yes, without a doubt, they are the things that can make the biggest difference. So the numbers will tell us if we improve our roads and roadsides, if we get the safe and appropriate speed on our networks, that is what will reduce the number of deaths and serious injuries without any doubt. But equally, things like vehicles. New Zealand's car fleet is old and getting older. 50% of our cars that come into New Zealand are new, and because about a good 60% of those are commercial, with the workplace safety and health obligations, they tend to be 5-star safety rated vehicles. So largely new cars coming in, we can be confident that they are safe. And of course you will have procurement policies for your staff, for your organisation, to ensure that your staff are driving the safest vehicles they can. But it's the used car area that is the biggest problem for New Zealand there. We import, and are quite unique, we import essentially cars that are valueless in Japan. They've reached 7 years. They're imported probably at a cost, they're bought probably for about $500 and retail out here at $5,000. So it's a very lucrative market. Our fleet has an average age of about 14 years and it's growing. So we have more older cars coming in. The sad thing is 50% of the deaths and serious injuries in the last 5 years are cars older than 15 years. Of the 26% of deaths and serious injuries are our youngest people, our youngest drivers, 16 to 24. Perfect storm. We're putting our youngest, most vulnerable people in the worst cars on our roads. You know, so changing our vehicle fleet is something that is as critical to do as it is to invest in our roads and roadsides. So we put, for instance, we've made a suggestion to MOT that they actually ban 1- and 2-star cars from coming into the market. But look, I'll just come to the context of that. But certainly there are things that we can do as New Zealanders. I mean, NZTA obviously can lobby and influence, as you can. But we can't. We don't implement the. You know, we implement the policies. We don't make them. So that's a government choice to make. And of course, even that example relies on things like having good analysis about social equity, because there is a perception, for instance, that young New Zealanders can't afford cars. But actually, there is no data that actually says that. It's a common assumption. But I know because we're working with MOT to do the social equity analysis that looks at average household income relative to car ownership. There is no data. We did a rough a rough order cut on that, for instance, looking at the social deprivation index, and actually the surprising figure was when you looked at the social deprivation index relative to car ownership, 30% of the 1 and 2 star cars are actually with families who can actually afford better choices, affluent families. So these are families who can actually make a choice if they're informed. So vehicles, critical thing to make to work. Equally, oddly enough, on the emissions side, even though I mentioned the 5-star cars being the safest cars coming in, they're also, some of them are the worst emitters. Because New Zealand has a, in terms of vehicle emissions, because New Zealanders have a, well, in fact, I think 60% of the new cars coming in are either SUVs, utes, vans, so they're the bigger cars that tend to emit more particulates. So, you know, that's why those levers, the safety and environment, are really, really important. The other area, so there's roads and roadsides, which is I mentioned. So we're working really hard to build up, well, we've built a national picture of where across the country investment would make the biggest difference in deaths and serious injuries. So your staff have a tool, they have literally have a tool called Megamaps, and that is a base for rating our roading network, 100,000 kilometres of roading network, local roads, state highways, and it rates the roading system based on a number of features such as geometry, curvature, numbers of driveways on a particular piece of road, sight lines. So it's an engineering view of what, and I stress the engineering view of those factors that are more likely to be predictive in terms of risk. Because traditionally, you know, the response has been to where there's an accident, right? So, you know, following the black spots, but actually that's the reactive side. And if you take my comment earlier around 50% of deaths and serious injuries simply occurring because someone has made a mistake, chasing black spots is like chasing lightning, because you never know where it's going to happen, you know. So yes, crash data is important, but equally the predictive stuff about knowing where the risk actually is in a network, what intersections, what parts of the rural network, is a really important thing to do, and we have that tool. Now, I said it's an engineering view because the next thing that's really important is to make sense of it. You know, so if we're looking and using that tool either to invest in an engineering solution or a speed solution, because the same tool sets the safe and appropriate speeds, you've actually got to talk to communities about what that means. So, for instance, you know, State Highway 3, we're putting in, and we first put in median barriers. You know, the things that communities raise are, how do I get into my driveway? Where does the agricultural vehicle pull over so to let people safely past? The heavy haulage industry will say, well, if I'm moving a house, how can I get it over a barrier? The school bus people will say, where's the safe and appropriate place for a school bus to pull over? So the engineering solution will say, put the barrier all the way down that road, but you've got to actually work with the community to make sure that you are getting a response that meets their needs in the same way. So that engagement with communities is really important. So we are working on an ambitious program of broad spread programs. Things like median treatments, shoulders, rumble strips, ubiquitously across the network as far as we can go with the money that is available. And just to give a sense of size, a median barrier per kilometre can cost between $1.5 and $3.5 million to install 1 kilometre, sorry, 2.5. Now the reason for that, the barrier, the wire itself is like 100,000 K, but you've got to maintain the width of the road. You've also got to make sure there's sufficient shoulder for cyclists, so they're separated from the road. So when you have to widen the corridor, widen the road, that's where the cost comes in. You know, so people just think it's a really simple thing to go and do, but actually it's quite complex to actually engineer and meet everyone's needs in the way you can. So we want to, you know, be far more ambitious about the level of median barrier treatments across the network. Speed, if you want this, the nearest thing to a silver bullet, speed is it. Obviously, you know, you could, if you wanted to, you could make the speed across the entire network 30 kilometres an hour, and you would have a very safe network, but that's just ridiculous. Okay, so what we've developed, and your team will be very aware of this, is a speed management guide and a rule that's backed up with this Mega Maps tool. So when Jeff, I think you were talking about the speed in the urban area, that speed of 40 k's. That's the recommended speed for urban areas in the speed management guide. So that's where that comes from. It's not just a figure that people have pulled out. There's good science for doing that. But speed is one of the hardest conversations to have with communities. So we need to make sure we've got the right speed for the right type of road for its form and function. Now, I can say with my hand on my heart, because I personally actually signed off the speed to put up 110 on the expressway and the Tauranga Eastern Link. Now, that's appropriate because that road is engineered and designed specifically for those types of speeds. By contrast, our roads in our rural areas are not designed and engineered for 100 kilometres an hour. People think they are. Actually, there's a whole lot of engineering stuff which I've had to learn. I know now far more about super elevation and curve radius than I ever want to know. But what I didn't understand when I came into the role was actually there's a whole lot of engineering about a road. You know, we think of camber and we think of those types of things. But actually, so the corner, the radius of a corner and the camber, all those types of things, half of the new roads in New Zealand were never designed for 100k. You know, so the number, 87% of our total network does not have the safe and appropriate speeds. If you want to make a difference, then those are the kind of tricky conversations you're going to have with communities, because people value time. People really value time. So when you make a suggestion about putting a speed limit down, people will say, but I will get there slower. And so the conversation was, well, you know, what's a little bit of time? And it really is actually a little bit of time if you're going to save a life. Because the whole basis behind the safe system approach, essentially, is to reduce crash force. It's kinetic energy. It's physics. So the faster you go, the bigger the mess. So, we want to work with you to make sure that we are targeting the safe and appropriate speed for the network, for the urban environments, and for schools, and for outside your hospitals, outside your rest homes, outside the places where vulnerable people interact with the roading network, but also in your rural network. So I'll come to some of the mechanisms. So roads, roadside speed, vehicles. The final thing I'll cover purely for Leo is safe use. So we'll be doing a huge amount of work with the police, Leo. I personally now have a strong relationship with the Deputy Commissioner and the Assistant Commissioner. So we've got all the numbers back up. You know, remember there was a phase where the number of police was reduced. We're now back to the full 1070. The police numbers have also increased in general policing. So there's another 1,800 police that are being introduced to the force. You're already seeing from 1 July a lot more police on the road and a lot more presence, and I've seen it myself. So more presence, more targeted intervention, but mostly we want to have joined up intervention. So when we are embarking on the program of managing speeds, it's not just a matter of changing the speed limit, it needs to be enforced. It needs to be enforced. So making sure that working with the police so that as we roll out a speed management plan that we actually have a level of enforcement. The other area I'm working on with the police is around speed cameras, point-to-point cameras, and automation. So we are going to be trialling point-to-point cameras. We're going to start with Waterview Tunnel to see how that works. And one of the reasons for that is that an average speed, so by the numbers, we've actually had point cameras and point-to-point cameras, but not switched on for the purpose of enforcement in Waterview Tunnel. We have cameras, fixed cameras. So we're measuring the number of infringements from the fixed cameras, and we were measuring what number of infringements we would have had if we were only using point-to-point. There's about a 70% reduction in the number of infringements that would be produced by using average speed rather than point speed, purely because there's a lot of double counting. Someone accelerates into the tunnel, slows down, goes through the tunnel and accelerates out and can get double in infringements. So long story short, average speeds is a much better way of making sure that that you're getting a good level of enforcement and the same deterrent effect, but you're not spitting out infringements. You're not spitting out infringements, because actually I don't really care about the level of infringements. I just want people to drive at the safe and appropriate speed. That's the whole point of this. That's why we will signpost things to say there is a speed camera here, because we want people to actually just drive. You know, success for me is we get people driving at the right speed and no infringements. So we're working with the police, to get a whole lot more presence around speed, distraction, mobile phone use, alcohol, of course, and drug driving, impaired driving. So that's the things we're asking the police to target on. So you've seen the headline in terms of investment. So 4.3 billion. It's a $1.2 billion increase in the safety spend out of a $16.9 billion land transport program. It's the biggest ever investment in road safety that's ever been made in New Zealand. So we have a government that has made this their priority. So you know, now's our time to make a difference in terms of the road toll. That aside, there's a number of things that I don't like and we are working on. One is we had a business case process, and I'm not answering because I saw it in Dave's thing, that was, I didn't think was fit for purpose for safety. So we are working on this as we speak to have a much simplified business case process for safety improvements. In fact, I'm working on actually taking some of the very low level activities such as rumble strips, medium barriers, so you don't have to have a business case at all. So it's a standard intervention. We know what the mix is, so we deal with it in the same way that we deal with maintenance. It becomes an activity plan, not a business case process. So we need to deliver works on the ground now. I don't want 6 months, 8 months, 9 months of business case processes that are starting to slow those things down. Having said that, the only thing is you do need to make sure we've got to just demonstrate value for money, because this is taxpayers, well actually road users, funds, and we have an obligation to make sure that we're spending that in the best way for them. You know, so you've got to have checks and balances in the system, but it's got to be appropriate to the level of works that you're trying to deliver on the ground. We're not building four-way highways anymore. You know, that's not true. We're finishing off the ones that were built, but this government's agenda is not to build any more four-lane highways, and to put the funding into reflecting some of the more modern needs of mass transit, passenger transport access, and of course road safety. So business case, the other one that you all know about is the FAR rate, the financial assistance rate. So the basic thing is we classify, you know, can you imagine, we get every project that everyone wants to do from one end of the country to the other. And when we form the National Land Transport Program, we have to decide which ones fit best with a GPS and which ones don't. So we have a low, medium, high, very high category. Right? Very high are those things that are that tool, mega maps, would indicate are the parts of the network or the speed that will give us the greatest reduction in deaths and serious injuries. Right? So that will be the discriminator between essentially what you'd fund under a normal FAR rate and something that would be very high or high. Okay? So you need to work with your team to understand where those types of locations and works are. Because what we've had to do is stand back and said, if we're going to invest in road safety, which parts of the network, what is the top 10% of the network where you'd get the greatest return in terms of reducing deaths and serious injuries? And essentially, you're in the right place because it's volume related. You know, so the highest collective risk is in those areas where, you know, there's high regional connectors, high urban mobility, that type of stuff. So I don't know the exact details of where Hamilton would sit, but certainly the Waikato, Auckland and Canterbury are the three highest priority areas to invest in to make a difference. Speed. So business case process, the FAR rate, that calculation, so for the very high, instead of getting your 51%, I think, Chris, is it 51%?
Yeah.
Council gets. So you'll get between, on the very high, you'll get between 51% and 100%. So that'll average out at about a 75% subsidy from the, well, 75% assistance from the National Land Transport Program. So your local rating ask would be the 25% that remains for that. But remember, a number of these projects, they're not the big transformational big projects. You know, the types of things that can make a difference here in the urban, it's the intersections. It's going to be your speed management and the slight rural. I mean, you haven't got a rural area, but the other thing is to what we want to try and do with the far right is to get as much collaboration as we can. You know, so you know, it'd be an epic fail. You imagine if we say between here and I don't know the Coromandel, and we had one state highway or one feeder road in the local road like Long Swamp or wherever it may be, that covers about 2 or 3 territorials, and everyone treats the speed treatment slightly differently, or the level of service in terms of safety. Imagine medium barriers only getting halfway down. You know, so the collaboration aspect of this, because a network, you know, isn't just about territorial boundaries. So we're going to try and incentivise the FAR system to get as much collaboration as we can. I mean, the obvious example at Auckland, we just want to go out with a speed management plan that's a network plan, not a local corridor site-by-site plan, including the state highways and local roads. You know, so if there's an aspiration, would be for to look at a regional or sub-regional level that actually says, in terms of the network, how do we get the state highway and the local road speeds at the same place? Really, because you can imagine, say we put down a speed on a state highway to 80 kilometres and the local roads were 100. Every GPS in the world is going to point people right across the local roading network, because it's the so we've got to make sure we do. You know, this is that common sense stuff. So far rate on the mechanism for how the far rate will be. Excuse me. How the far rate will be developed. We haven't written any criteria yet. We're going to be working with you guys to do that. So we're working with Local Government New Zealand. So there's this little safety group as part of Local Government New Zealand, which I'm sure you're on, Dave, or the team's on?
No, there's something I want to ask you about afterwards. The reference groups and those sorts of things.
Okay, that's a different thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's so we're working with local government about how we implement the things that we are responsible for. Okay, so that's that's things like how do we get this national program of safety improvements running, the speed, how do we use the enhanced far rate and so forth. So rather than us write it and say, here you are, we're actually working with local government, its representatives, to actually write the criteria. Okay, so coming to your question about reference groups, that's a different thing. So at the same time all this is going on, there's a refresh of the whole Safer Journeys strategy, and that's a very big thing. So that's starting next week, and so there are a number, so we have a current Safer Journeys strategy. It was due to finish in 2020. This is the start of the new Safer Journeys strategy, and there are a number of, the start of that process is to form a number of reference groups around vehicles as a workplace, around infrastructure in place, speed, and that takes a wide slice of the sector, private, public, those people who think we should never reduce speed ever, and those who think we should. So it's conflict. It's not a situation of just having like-minded people in a room. So you can imagine what that's going. It's going to be a good process to actually sift out where the strengths and the weaknesses and opportunities in the system are. So my understanding is the Waikato has been invited, Dave, to be part of this reference group by MOT.
No, at the Regional Transport Committee meeting yesterday, there was no obvious pathway for people from this region or the city to be on it. There were some areas, like it said, local government representative, but where that might be from.
Okay, look, I'll take that back and find out, because my understanding was there was an invitation made, but I'll find that out for you.
Certainly wasn't advised to the RTC yesterday.
Yeah, okay. Have you had the reply back from the Minister yet?
Yes, that was discussed. Well, I might as well say that there was big concern expressed, actually doubled down really on the by all of the delegates at the RTC yesterday, this is for the Regional Transport Committee, sorry, that we want to end up with a region-wide approach, sort of like what the collaboration you were talking about, and that it seemed like every TLA was still being left to make their own decisions. And I mentioned the example of K Road on the northern boundary of the city with Waikato District. We're having great trouble. We've got about 4 speed limits along it at the moment. 2 of them are different ones, because it's partly in Waikato District and partly in Hamilton City. And it's an area that's taking a lot more traffic because the developments are right on the edge of it now. So that was one example, and there were other examples like you're talking about out in the country where it crosses several jurisdictions, same road, and there's different approaches. Waikato District especially was stating that they had a real problem getting local communities to accept lower speeds on roads that were clearly unsafe for 100k speed limit, because that was their road that they knew how to drive on. Trouble was that a lot of people, other people driving it didn't.
Yeah. So look, the parallel piece of work that's going on, so there's a Safer Journey strategy, which is a 12-month process. So some of those questions like you've talked about with how do you assist local government with appropriate tools in terms of consultation with communities. So MOT and ourselves are working together on what can we do in terms of change some of the bylaw requirements, for instance. So what the speed management guide requires is that the setting of the speed must be made by a bylaw process. So what we want to try and do is question whether what's the mechanism that allows, because a consultation should occur. You can't just go into a dark room and make a decision, but it's about what you consult on, which should actually be the engineering, the safety design, not on, I just don't, I feel that this road is, I can go faster, because the engineering actually tells you it doesn't. So it's on the science, not on the general view. So what we're trying to do is make sure, what are those things that a decision maker takes into account when they're making the decision, not the number of submissions that say, I just don't like it. Right? So you'll be familiar with that process because it happens all the time. Evidence should be weighed and not counted. So what we're trying to do is get the appropriate level consultation that are the factors that should be taken into account when you're making a decision about a speed. And Dave, because also that by making it a bylaw actually tags it to a council. So if we can we want to try and find a mechanism that allows collective decision, one up from the sense, the very local decision, because that's hard. It's tough when you've got a community in your ear, and they've voted you in, So we want to make sure we've got a process that gets it at the right level, but isn't right so far away that it's actually not genuine consultation.
Thanks very much, Harry. And maybe I'll just come to the question of the sec. This presentation is basically here because we have a Vision Zero policy. The reality has not been Vision Zero, though, this year. We're facing what Harry's described right around the country. We're facing it here in Hamilton, 5 road deaths in a city where we've got no speed limit above 80k right now, and we're the first to bring 40k's outside every school and 30k's in some commercial areas, and we've still got 5 road deaths in the area. So we clearly need to do something different and more, presumably. So that's why we're sort of and got Harry to make this presentation and ask for questions now and from councillors, so if we can sort of avoid maybe too long speeches, but to keep it to questions and discussion with Harry. We've got a little bit of time, so Mark, you're first. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. And thank you, Harry. Nice to meet you. Heard a lot of good things about you.
That's unusual.
I just want to pick you up on the speed management thing. And we've had a big issue pretty much since I've been on council, about 18 months, almost 2 years, with a certain part of road, Gordonton Road. Trying to get the speed limit changed has been the slowest process in the world, and that's just getting a speed limit changed downwards. Now, the feedback, I know you say going to dark rooms and we all know best, etc., but the feedback has been we want to slow down rather than speed up. We can't slow it down. It's taken us this long to get a speed limit. October the 10th is the quickest we can get a speed limit reduced. We can't even go and just bang a sign in the ground. And I think in Hamilton, the area the areas are where the rural meets the city. Seems to be a big area. I wonder, I know you're talking about consultation, etc., but where is the ability for councils to be able to just go out and take immediate action? We can't go out the very next day and put a temporary thing out without, it seems to be, filling out enormous amounts of bureaucratic sort of forms to do it. So how can we get this even faster? I mean, I think the quickest we've got it down to now is about 6 months, but there's...
No, it depends. I mean, I did the 110, you know, so, you know, and that's by bylaw. And we had 7,000 submissions and that type of stuff. So it can be done. Often, as you know, it depends on the level of opposition or in favour, you know, so it's like a resource consent, actually. The number of submitters for and against makes it complex. So, but I think the trick is, where it gets hard is if the road, the community are looking for a speed that's lower than the speed management guide would recommend, right? And I don't know Gordonton, but I suspect that might be the case. But remember, the speed management guide also talks about engineering up. So so there are places where the community might want that speed lowered on the, because it is, you're right, it's that peri-urban boundary which keeps on going. So you get the people who live on the boundary want the speed down, but the people who go through it are the ones who want to keep a constant speed. And that's always the tension. You know,
I think I've been pretty safe ground, I'd say, James, here, suggesting that there wasn't a lot of opposition to slowing it down. The only opposition we had really was the time it took to get it slowed down. So I think the will was there, and you know, we've had really no kickback. Now that it is going to happen, I'm grateful for that happening. But it's just that enormous amount of time. We've had accident after accident. We've had a fatality in that time, and I start to take that personally when I can't work hard enough for my community. Fast enough.
So the answer to your question is the same one I was just saying to Dave, is, you know, we are trying to change the consultation requirements.
Good.
But I'm still want to be clear, we're not saying we're not going to consult.
Of course.
You know, because there's a natural justice. If people are affected by an activity, they should have the right to have a say about it. But it's focusing on the things that the effects, you know, not the just, I just don't want you know, the travel time convenience. Look, on the travel time, just give you a number. So, because when I was checking the 110, the difference between travelling 10 kilometres at 110 and 100 is 30 seconds. People think they're saving minutes. It's actually, you know, it's zip. You know, so you know, so that value of travel time, is the thing that people feel is a loss.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I think we're singing from the same hymn book there. I think I worked out that it's going to be a 30-second difference in that one corridor by that slight change. But again, I just want to finally just hammer home the fact that it is a very slow and frustrating process.
Your nail is absolutely hammered home, and I'm on the same side.
Thanks, Harry. Cheers.
Thanks. Actually, just when you mentioned the 110k speed limit, there was a strong feeling expressed, and has been for months, at the Regional Transport Committee, that it seemed far easier, looking from the outside, and quicker to put the speed limit up to 110 than it has been to get some speed limits lower. And then that spawned a discussion saying, well, if there's 87% of our roads aren't fit for 100 k's, why isn't the default set nationally at 80 k's? Then you put the case to make it go up if the road's capable of handling that, sort of doing it the reverse. At the moment, we have to put the case to lower the speed limit.
Yeah, look, it still took 3 months for the 110. It took time. You know, it may not. It may looked quick. Actually, I can assure you, it took a lot longer than I would have liked it to have occurred. But I think and again, it depends on. You know, so we had exactly the same process. You know, you still have the bylaw making process. You have to consult. You've got 28 days. You know, so the same timeframes that are required. So it's a matter of how you manage the process, Dave, in that sense.
I think we've got two parts of the process here, though. We don't just do the bylaw process, we have to do preliminary consultation. There's actually 2 steps. So our staff advise us that it's a quick job if you can get it done in 6 months for anything in the city.
We've got to be quicker than that.
And we are trying to change our processes, and other councils are a fair way behind us, but we've still got that sort of problem.
So look, you know, anything... Well, as I said, we are trying to, literally the suggestion is, because there's a number of options, but it's simply to remove from the speed management guide, the making by bylaw. and then specify, because it says thou shalt consult in the speed management guide.
Yeah.
But what it then does is, which kicks in a special consultative process. You know, so I can imagine a place where if you didn't do that, for instance, if you're doing a network plan, you could piggyback it on your annual plan. You don't have to actually have a special consultative process to do it. But you know, my advice is that, you know, the things is we should be doing this on scale, so not picking it off by little bit bit, is to, you know, do it on scale.
That's the approach we are looking at now. So that, for instance, any new school will have automatically be able to have a 40k speed limit, because that's the class that we've determined in our plan. But in fact, we're looking at the possibility of 30k's along with Napier and.
Well, we're looking at trying to enable that, Dave. 30k's around schools. Can I stress schools and catchments? Have a think about that too.
Yeah.
It's not the school gate. You want to get kids; they've got to feel safe walking from home to the school.
Yeah. Sorry, I got Jeff next.
Thanks, Harry. Really enjoyed that and found it really useful, and especially your comments around speed and quality of roads and design and that type of thing. One thing you didn't mention, and is the quality of our driving and the ability of our drivers. You did touch on the fact that 16 to 24-year-old were high in the statistics and that. But I've wondered for a while just about how good our drivers are in terms of capability compared with other countries, how skilled we are at, you know, road handling and our attitudes, how they are. Do you think enough work goes into improving driver ability? There's been talk in the past about driver training schools and all sorts of stuff, but I don't see any work going into that, and I wonder, is it not seen as an efficient use of money? Is it not seen as a priority?
It's not just. So I'd be happy to send you, because you know, like everyone else, when I first started this, I thought, well, actually, that's you know, until I understood what the safe system was. Actually, it was all about the driver. You know, if everyone just drove better, we'd be a lot better on the roads. Actually, this I'll send you it through via Dave. But I asked this question about driver behaviour, and actually the research internationally, the research says that actually interventions to help people drive better, particularly after, you know, through their life, actually don't work. Sounds counterintuitive. They're the least effective mechanism. So the things that do make a difference is the entry into the system, so the graduated driver licensing system. So, you know, getting the people into the system with the right levels of skills. But actually on skills, it's, the other side is, the other studies also show that if you take young people and you put them on racetracks and do various things to improve their skill, they become more dangerous because they take more risks. Okay, so the intention of a graduated driver licensing system is to actually get people to recognise risk and to manage it, so pay attention to the road. So look, I'll send you the science, but it's not, you know, that's what most people, you know, it's generally, I had that view, but it's not until you actually understand that this has been well researched. It's not just Harry pulling it out of his ear. So that the attention is early in the system. But the other side, again, by the numbers, is if you ask people to rate their driving behaviour, 80% of people say, I'm a good to excellent driver. Now, if you drew any distribution, that's impossible. It is absolutely impossible. Because people just actually assume that they're a good driver because they never had an accident.
Okay, thank you. Just a part two to that, Dave, very quickly, if I may. In terms of road policing, it's often seemed to me, and it may be a function of resources, that we're a little bit one-dimensional in the way we police on the roads. You must not go above this speed, you must not drink any more than this. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of emphasis on behaviour. You know, what about the guy who changes lanes 4 times in 30 seconds? What about the guy who never indicates? What about the guy who aggressively tailgates? You know, and I don't ever seem to see any interventions with that type of behaviour. It just seems to me like we're a little bit kind of one-dimensional. Do you talk to the police? You know, do you have a relationship where this sort of thing ever gets discussed or considered?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, you may not have seen it, but last year I did a Keeping Left campaign. Because one of the frustrations that a lot of people were experiencing were people who would not keep left in passing lanes. So we actually did a campaign on that and asked our police colleagues to actually enforce it.
Does anyone ever get pulled up for anything?
Yeah,
like
they did. What I could do is actually look at the number of infringements or number of tickets that are actually issued for offences that aren't just speed and trauma, and there are a lot of them. So let the numbers talk to it. But yeah.
Never
so
seems to be in my vision.
No, well, you know, as I said, you know, the numbers of police on the road actually physically dropped in the last 3 years, and they're now back up to scratch. So you'll see a lot more presence on the road, and I know they are because I've been driving around it, and I'm seeing a lot more of them than I ever did.
Yeah, but do you see what I mean about the difference between driving behaviour and just sheer rules? You must not do that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of our, some places there are rules, but there's a lot of courtesy that occurs. You know, it's the old thing of, you know, to tow a caravan, when you come, you pull to the left. There's no rule that says you should do that, but it's just a courtesy that you try and do. You know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. And councillor, sorry, I'm going to try and move it along a little bit fast now because we've got 5 questions we do need to finish by about 15:15. I've got Siggy next.
I'd milk it while I could.
Yeah, thank you for your report. That was
Yeah.
very interesting. Really quick questions. Look, just about the compulsory driving lessons, I did them many years ago in Germany, and we didn't go on speedways or anything. We actually just did it around town, and I think that was still helpful. So that it's still, I think, something people still don't know how far they have to pass when they pass a cyclist. That's what I find in New Zealand. They all drive too close to a cyclist. We learned that in driving lessons. So, and I still remember that. The other thing is there any, because you mentioned there was some data that's just not available. Is there any data available that when there are accidents and road deaths about the people being on pharmaceutical medication?
Yes, there is actually Sam Charlton here from the Waikato University did a very good study on that. So that, and we've actually been doing a few campaigns around this, particularly use of prescription drugs and anxiety medication.
Yeah.
And you know, particularly concerning in things like heavy vehicles, professional services, taxis, that type of stuff. But no, that when people's the level of, you know, people just assume it's opiates. Actually, it is just as risky having prescription medication that will cause fatigue. You know, it's a very good reason there's a warning on your bottle that says do not, you know, on your pill bottle that says do not drive. Well, you've got this, but people do.
Yeah.
So what we've been trying to do is also make sure that the GP, instead of just putting a paste on the bottle and leaving the chemist to do it, is also cautions people about what this will do. So we've done a very active campaign with GPs to have a conversation with people about that.
Great. Oh, I love that. I love hearing that. The last question I've got is following from Councillor Bunting's question, you know, about the length it takes to take a speed limit down. What would really happen to us if we just did it? Interim signs? Did anybody take us, you know, handcuff us or anything, or we could do something like that?
The dilemma would be the police couldn't enforce it. So, and look, this actually happened. So there was a temporary speed area out here at St Peters. It was on our state highway network. We didn't realise that it was actually illegal at the time. And there was a tragic death at that intersection. And so that's how it came. So, so the dilemma is it can't be enforced.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
And if the police produced infringements, they'd have to go back to everyone and take them back.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Siggy. Martin, please.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I acknowledge your amazing work over many years in transport, and you'll be pleased to know Leo in particular has told us particularly, just very quickly, it won't take too long, he said he speaks to adult service groups, Rotary Lions. He says to those guys, you give your car that you've driven here to your kids, and you drive your kids' old crap cars, because that'll improve the road toll.
We use the same technical term for old cars as well, Martin.
But just on that, and that leads me into, I guess, when we're trying to lobby MPs and others, our role as a lobbyist, and the 2 critical points you said, you know, 50% of crashes, serious injury or death, cars older than 2003, 50% simple mistake stuff, so it's not the horrible you know. have you got some kind of those kind of fact sheets?
I've got them coming out of my ears, mate.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, because I think that would be, you know, like it's what I call the key line. So when we're, in our little way, when we're lobbying the Parliament, we should be obviously reinforcing,
Some key messages.
all those
Look, I could work with
messages.
Robin particularly. Robin knows all has all
But if
these
we
numbers.
could have that, you know, as a
happy to
card
provide that.
thing, I think that's crucial.
Yeah.
How much advertising are we doing, say, with parents? Because a lot of parents, I feel, even though they if they dipped into their own pockets, in some cases could actually help their kids get a slightly better car. How many parents just don't get
They
that
don't.
if your car's older than 2003, it's
No,
a bad deal?
that's actually what we found out, actually, was how little people know. You know, so we are actually going to be doing a campaign to try and inform people about, you know, what the choices they could make. You know, because you can actually get a difference between a 1-star and a 3-star car in the same price bracket. You know, people, when they purchase, the biggest feature for selling cars in America is Bluetooth connectivity, nothing to do with safety. You know, that's what people look at, you know, and even the new cars, ironically, people think it's the safety assist, the technology that does it. It's actually the crumple zones and things like that inside the car that are the
That's
important
it,
things.
the body.
The latest Mustang went from a 2 to a 3-star car simply because it put more technology, and the reason it still stayed a 3-star car is because the crumple zone is appalling.
Absolutely, because of the body.
It's the latest Mustang.
Yeah.
What were they thinking?
Just two quick questions. The question I'd have around, and even in terms of the, you know, bringing in cars, you know, what is our rules? Is Parliament moving on that so that there's a point at which, unless it's a so-called classic vintage, it's got to be of certain star rating, a certain age to come in from Japan, given if it comes in second hand, it's got a 10-year life or 15-year life?
So the vehicles work stream of the Safer Journeys is exactly where that kind of question will be done. There aren't any restrictions. In fact, the reason we've got the awful mess we're in is because we've just opened up our market Japanese cars. The two other big markets with Japanese cars, believe it, the Arab Emirates and Myanmar. Burma. Yeah, that's it.
We're in good league there.
And we have more Japanese imports than per head of population than anyone else.
And just a final question at a time. So you mentioned this government's moving away from the 4-lane expressway. One of our critical issues is south of our expressway from Cambridge to Tauranga, Tokoroa, Taupo. What is the synergy, if you like, between, you know, the 2+1 deals, you know, value for money? Because we obviously need a safe, efficient network going to our, you know, our Tauranga and our other major centres, but not necessarily because of the money doing the expressway in terms of having still what I call a higher grade of highway that doesn't involve a whole lot of farm gates and people coming onto that particular highway.
Yeah, Martin, I mean, if you want to make the biggest, you know, you can certainly say there is, you know, because there are some standout roads like State Highway 2 north of Tauranga, Cambridge Pairi, Northland. But the other question is, you turn the question around and say, if you were going to try and reduce deaths and serious injuries, and you had this amount of money, where would you go? Now, it may not involve that, right? And it may. You know, but if you turn the question around and said, if you really want to make a difference in the road toll,
yes,
you know, and believe me, I actually think the expressway was one of the best things that has ever been. And you know, Dave knows how much I was involved with getting that started, moved, and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a good thing for the time because there would have been underinvestment in the regional connectivity, you know, in terms of the state highway system. You know, so actually, you know, I do actually support turning off the 4-laning because now is the time that we need to reinvest in our rural areas and our urban areas. You know, so it's. I'm not just saying that because it's a government party line. There's a time to do scale investment. There's a time to actually spread the net and make sure that, you know, these are.
All I'm saying.
Thanks, Martin. That was your final question. Your words, James.
Chair, and thank you, Harry. That's probably one of the most interesting presentations I've heard around this chamber since I've been here. It's pretty good. And I'll have to agree with you that most accidents are caused by mistakes because my daughter is in road policing. She was at a RBT checkpoint last week and they had a crash where a vehicles were rear-ended by another one. It was a simple mistake by a guy changing his radio channel. He would see the RBT in front of him, and he wasn't even drunk. But with my question's on the cheese cutter wires that are in the central barriers. Is there a reason for that instead of solid barriers? Because I'm a motorcyclist, and you come off, hit those cheese cutters. It's not the most pleasant things for a motorcyclist to hit.
So the difference is that the wire barriers are flexible, right? So they absorb the force and hold it and then push, and then people move back. A hard barrier like concrete, you literally, and side barriers are designed essentially to deflect. So if you hit them front on, you can go straight through them. You know, they won't stop a truck. So they're designed to deflect. So it literally relates to the amount of force that is absorbed by the structure or the deflection. So wire barriers are the most effective because they, it's like having a big rubber band that actually pulls things and holds it and then moves, as opposed to hitting a solid object. So that's the logic. The cheese cutter is a myth. You're right, you wouldn't want to come off, but people actually, most motorbikes fall on the side and people slide. So we've been trialling in the Coromandel on the motorbike routes. We've been doing trials about what types of things we can do to help motorcyclists, particularly the barriers. Particularly things. It's actually the starts and the ends and the posts themselves. Yeah. That's where the things happen. It's not the barrier. It's not the wire barrier itself. Yeah. You
crashed your stomach.
Yeah. So look, we've got lots of information because there is a real popular myth that there've been, all these. There hasn't actually been one death from a motorcyclist in a wire barrier.
Okay. Well, the best training for a motorcyclist to safely use the road is actually to be involved in an accident, because I had a few when I was younger and they hurt, I tell you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Leo, please.
Yeah, go Harry. Harry, when we go back into history a little bit, probably one of the best initiatives they had was 2010 strategy, whereby they said no more than 300 deaths and no 4,500 injuries by the year 2010. Yeah. Martin's friend George Hawkins introduced the highway patrol, which was probably the greatest thing which ever happened as far as enforcement was concerned. Yeah. We actually hit the target in 2011 with 285 under the 300, and we stayed under 300 until last year, 2017, when I think it was 378, I think we came in at. And now it's going ahead. How come we achieved this with a 5-year? And we had a presentation here recently from the local road policing manager to say that what they're really trying to do is reduce the number of infringements, have a conversation and a cup of tea with the offender, and then move on from there. You said that you're talking with the police. Is this just a local initiative which is happening in the Waikato, or is this, I will call it softly approach by police, happening nationwide?
That's the first I've heard of it, so I'm assuming it's not nationwide, but you guys in the Waikato do things differently, Leo.
We used to.
Yeah. I don't think it was a cup of tea. I think that part was...
well, I might as well, Dave.
But to go to your question, so there was definitely, if you look at the statistics nationwide in New Zealand and Australia and around the world, there was actually a drop between 11 and 14. So between 2011 and 14, all the numbers were going down.
True. Right?
So they've all picked up since then. And that's not just New Zealand, that's Australia as well, Leo. And to be honest, I think New Zealand took its foot off the brake, basically. Yep. Because they thought that trend will continue, and it didn't. But also, you think, well, what else was going on? GFC, global financial crisis. So people weren't travelling as much. People weren't buying big bikes. People weren't, the number of trucks on the road was diminishing. So there's a whole lot of things that was going on at that time that actually had, it was just a whole confluence of events. Don't think you can attribute it to just simply the road policing work at that time. Yeah.
I might be indulged, Mr. Chair. You made me feel very guilty when you said that fatality could be as a result of somebody actually dropping a pie in their lap.
Yeah.
If I may just tell a 2-minute story. Many years ago in 1972, when I was a traffic cop down in Tiwau, I checked the speed of an EH Holden, about 75 miles an hour in the Pairere area. And I noticed that the driver had the quarter light window open on the old E.H. Holden, and he was eating a pie, and he was holding the pie up to the quarter light window because it must have been very, very hot.
To cool it down.
Yeah. And I noticed that he would occasionally take a bite of the pie and then put it back into the quarter light window. And I came up beside him when we got to Horror with the two-lane section, and I was driving an unmarked patrol car in those days, so he didn't know that I was a traffic cop. And I put the siren on him just as he was going to take a bite out of his pie. And when I got out of
I'm not sure I want to hear this, Leo.
And when I got out of the patrol car and parked behind him, here he was, unbeknown to me, in a pair of football shorts. And the football shorts actually were just about disintegrated with the heat of the pie. So, yeah,
not
as
all
you
that
say,
disintegrated.
the pie could actually cause a fatality, which I hadn't realised.
Yeah.
So that's enough pie
Always blow on the
stories.
pie, is the story.
No more pie stories. Angela, last one, thanks.
Thanks. It's not a question of about a pie. Look, apologies to, for being here late, and thanks for your presentation. What I saw, just stop me if this question's already been asked. I read a news item in the weekend that said the latest data on serious accidents are coming from distraction and now not alcohol and other substances. So, A, is that true? And B, what is NZTA going to do about addressing that?
So distraction is part of that same number I talked about. So the 50% of people making mistakes, distraction is one part of that. You know, that can be leaning over to the babies in the back seat, changing the...
Texting?
Yeah, well, that's a whole different story. Yeah, but that's part of that same thing, you know. So, you know, but look, the other thing in the statistics I didn't mention, last year we had, of the 380, 100 people weren't wearing the seatbelts. 100 people weren't wearing the seatbelts. I thought we'd won that war a long time ago. So, you know, the numbers are really important.
So in that, sorry Harry, in that 50%, does that not count the legal use of a cell phone while driving?
We don't actually have the numbers. That's one thing we don't. We're doing some research with, particularly in Australia and here, about, because we actually don't have numbers about the number of people who are using cell phones, and also it's really impossible at a crash analysis to actually work out whether someone was on a phone or not. You know, so you make a lot of inferences when you do when the crash investigation is being done. But again, our thing here is, yes, look, we all know what causes crashes, isn't it? You know, we know it's alcohol, speed, we know it's distracted driving. The whole point is, how do we stop people dying? You know, when someone does make a mistake. That's the whole point here.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Harry. Really appreciate it. And obviously, you can see the councillors are very
That's great. I love getting out and talking.
We now have 170,000 traffic engineers in Hamilton, as Chris says. So we're all dead keen on discussing this issue. So
well, I've got 4.5 million advisors.
Yes, that's right. So look, appreciate that. Stay. We're going to break for a coffee now until past. Stay and have a chat with us during that.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Gary. Gary's moved that we receive the report from NZTA, which I'll second. Those in favour, against, carried. We'll come back at past, and Vanessa, you two come in and have a coffee tea with us as well. Yeah.
Remember it? You were. Appreciate it. you.